There is something incredibly powerful about silence, especially when it comes from someone who once showed consistent presence. When a woman suddenly stops contacting a man, it doesn't just go unnoticed. It disrupts something he had quietly grown used to. Because whether he admitted it or not, he expected her to be there. He expected the messages, the effort, the consistency. It became part of his routine, something familiar, something predictable. And then it stops. No warning, no explanation, no dramatic exit. Just at first, he may not react. He might assume she's busy, distracted, or simply taking a moment. But as time passes and that silence remains, something begins to shift. Because what was once predictable is now uncertain. And uncertainty is what captures attention. He starts to notice the absence, not just of her messages, but of her energy. The way she used to show up, the way she kept things moving, the way she made her presence known without forcing it. And now, without that, there's a gap. A break in the pattern he didn't even realize he depended on. This is where curiosity begins. Because when something changes without explanation, the mind naturally tries to understand it. He begins to wonder why she stopped. What changed? Did something happen? Is she no longer interested? And these questions don't come from her reaching out. They come from her absence. That's the power of silence. It doesn't chase. It doesn't demand answers. It creates them. It forces him to think, to reflect, to pay attention in a way he didn't before. Because when someone is always present, there's no need to question their place. But when that presence disappears, it becomes impossible to ignore. And what makes this even more impactful is that her silence is not filled with mixed signals. There are no half efforts, no occasional check-ins to keep him comfortable. It's consistent. And that consistency is what makes it real. It shows that this isn't temporary. It's intentional. At this point, his expectations begin to break. He may have assumed she would always be the one to reach out, the one to keep things alive. But now, that assumption no longer holds. And when expectations are broken, attention shifts. What was once taken for granted becomes something he starts to notice, question, and even miss. He may check his phone more often, wondering if she'll reach out. He may replay the last interaction, trying to find a reason for the sudden change. And in doing so, his focus begins to move toward her. Not because she is chasing him, but because she stopped. This is where the dynamic changes, because her silence is no longer empty. It's meaningful. It carries weight, intention, and impact. It turns something ordinary into something unforgettable. And deep down, he realizes something he didn't expect. Her silence is louder than her presence ever was. And as that silence continues, something even more powerful begins to unfold. Space, not just physical space, but emotional and mental space that he didn't have before. Because when communication is constant, when someone is always reaching out, always present, there is very little room left to truly feel anything deeply. Everything moves quickly, almost automatically. But when that connection is suddenly removed, everything slows down. And in that stillness, he is left alone with his own thoughts. At first, this space may feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. He may try to distract himself, to fill the gap with other things, other people, other routines. But no matter what he does, the absence remains. Because this isn't just about missing messages. It's about missing a presence that once occupied a part of his mental and emotional world. Without her reaching out, without her initiating conversation, he no longer has anything to respond to. And that changes everything, because now, instead of reacting to her, he is reflecting on her. This is where realization begins. He starts to think about what she brought into his life, the consistency, the attention, the energy she offered so naturally. Things he may have overlooked before now come into focus. Not because she's reminding him, but because the absence of those things makes them visible. He may begin to replay moments, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, repetitive way. Conversations that once felt normal now feel meaningful. Small gestures he didn't fully appreciate now carry weight. And in that process, he starts to understand something he didn't before. Her value was never in what she demanded, but in what she gave. And now, without it, he feels the difference. This is the power of no contact. It doesn't force someone to see your worth. It gives them the space to realize it on their own. And realization that comes from within is always stronger than anything that is explained from the outside. He may start to notice how his days feel slightly different. There are moments where he expects to hear from her, only to be met with silence. And in those moments, her absence becomes more real, not overwhelming, not dramatic, but consistent enough to be felt. That consistency is what makes the realization deeper, because this is not about a temporary pause. It's about a complete shift in dynamic. She is no longer filling the space for him. She has stepped back, and now that space belongs to him. And what he does with it determines what he begins to feel. Over time, that space turns into awareness. Awareness of what he had, what he lost, and what he may have taken for granted. And that awareness doesn't come from pressure. It comes from silence. Because silence doesn't argue, it doesn't convince. It reveals, and in that space, with nothing left to distract him, he begins to feel her absence more clearly than he ever felt her presence. And as that space turns into awareness, something even more intriguing begins to happen. She becomes a mystery in his mind. Not because she changed who she is, but because she is no longer explaining herself, no longer showing up in predictable ways, no longer giving him access to her thoughts, her emotions, or her presence. And what cannot be understood cannot be easily forgotten. She was still contacting him. There was clarity. He knew where she stood. He knew her interest. He knew her energy. Everything was visible, accessible, and easy to read. But now, with her silence, all of that disappears. And in its place comes uncertainty. He no longer knows what she's thinking. He doesn't know how she feels. He doesn't know if she's moved on, if she still cares, or if she's completely detached. And that lack of clarity creates something powerful: curiosity. Because the human mind is naturally drawn to what it cannot fully understand, he may start asking himself questions he never considered before. Why did she stop? Was it something I did? Is she talking to someone else? Does she even think about me anymore? And these questions don't come from her saying anything. They come from her saying nothing at all. That's the shift, because when everything was clear, there was no need to think deeply. But now, with no answers being given, his mind begins to search for them. And in that search, she stays present, not through communication, but through curiosity. He may find himself checking for signs, looking for clues, trying to understand something that is no longer being explained. And the more he tries to figure it out, the more he thinks about her. Not because she is reaching out, but because she has become unpredictable. And unpredictability creates focus. What once felt certain now feels open-ended. What once felt easy now feels distant. And that distance makes him lean in mentally, trying to close the gap that her silence has created. At the same time, her absence gives her a kind of presence he didn't expect. Because now she is not defined by her actions. She is defined by the unknown. And the unknown carries a weight that certainty never does. He begins to imagine different possibilities, different scenarios, different reasons behind her silence. And in doing so, he creates his own version of her in his mind, one that is no longer limited to what she shows, but expanded by what he cannot see. And that's what makes her unforgettable. Because mystery doesn't fade quickly. It lingers, it stays unresolved, it keeps the mind engaged long after the connection itself has paused. And without saying a single word, she has shifted from being understood to being something he can't stop trying to figure out. And as this mystery begins to take hold in his mind, something else quietly awakens: his ego. Not in an obvious or loud way, but in a subtle, internal shift that he doesn't immediately recognize. Because when she was the one reaching out, when she was consistent and present, there was a sense of familiarity, even comfort. He knew where he stood. He knew she was there. But now, that certainty is gone. And the first reaction isn't always emotional, it's mental. A quiet confusion mixed with a sense of disruption. Why did she stop? Why hasn't she reached out? What changed? At this stage, it's not about missing her yet. It's about trying to understand the break in expectation. because his ego was used to a pattern, used to her presence, used to the idea that she would always be there in some form. And when that pattern breaks without explanation, it challenges something within him. At first, he may feel a sense of control slipping. Not in a dramatic way, but enough to make him pause, enough to make him notice. Because now, the dynamic has changed. He is no longer the one being pursued or engaged in the same way, and that shift creates tension. This is where curiosity begins to grow. He starts paying more attention, even if he doesn't admit it. Checking for signs, thinking about her more often, wondering what she's doing and why she hasn't come back. And the more he thinks, the more that curiosity deepens. It moves from simple questions into something more consistent, more present in his mind. And over time, that curiosity begins to take on a different form. Because when there are no answers, no closure, no communication to resolve the uncertainty, the mind doesn't let go. It holds on. It keeps returning to the same questions, the same thoughts, the same possibilities. And in doing so, she remains present in his mental space, even without being physically or emotionally available. That's where the shift happens, from curiosity to fixation. Not because she is doing anything, but because she stopped doing everything. Her silence created a loop in his mind that doesn't easily close. He may try to move on to focus elsewhere, but something keeps pulling his attention back. A thought, a memory, a question that was never answered. And the more he tries to understand it, the more it stays with him, because obsession doesn't always begin with intense emotion. It often begins with unresolved curiosity. With something left open, something unfinished, something that doesn't make complete sense. And that's exactly what her silence created. She didn't chase, she didn't explain, she didn't give him the answers his mind was looking for. And because of that, his mind continues to search, to replay, to revisit. And before he fully realizes it, what started as confusion becomes something he can't easily stop thinking about. And as this fixation quietly takes hold, his mind begins to do something even more intense. He starts going back. Not forward, not outward, but inward. Into memories, into moments, into everything that once felt ordinary but now feels significant. Because when there is no new interaction, no new messages, no new experiences being created, the mind turns to what already exists. And in his case, that means replaying every detail he can remember. It starts subtly. A random memory appears. Something small, something he didn't think much of at the time. A conversation, a moment, a reaction she had. And instead of passing by like it once did, it lingers. He pauses on it. He thinks about it longer. He begins to examine it from a different perspective. And then it happens again, another memory, another moment, another detail. And slowly, these pieces begin to connect. He starts to see patterns, meanings, emotions that he didn't fully recognize when everything was happening in real time. Because in the moment, things move quickly. There's no time to analyze, no need to reflect deeply. But now, with silence and space, reflection becomes inevitable. He may begin to question how she felt during certain moments, whether she was trying to show him something he didn't fully understand, whether there were signs he overlooked, emotions he didn't acknowledge, efforts he didn't fully match. And that realization doesn't come all at once. It builds, because each memory adds another layer. Each reflection brings more clarity. And with that clarity comes a deeper understanding of her and of himself. He may start to notice how consistent she was, how present she was, how she showed up in ways that didn't demand attention but deserved it. And the more he sees it, the harder it becomes to ignore. This is where things begin to shift emotionally. Because now it's not just about curiosity or confusion. It's about meaning. The past is no longer just a series of moments. It becomes something he tries to understand, something he replays not out of habit, but out of a need to make sense of what he had. And the more he replays it, the more real it becomes. He may find himself stuck in certain memories, going over them again and again, trying to interpret them differently, trying to see what he missed. And in doing so, he begins to feel something he didn't allow himself to feel before, because reflection creates emotion. And emotion, when it's tied to something that no longer exists in the present, has a way of pulling the mind back repeatedly. This is how her absence keeps her present, not through messages, not through interaction, but through memory, through moments that now carry more weight than they ever did before. And deep down, he realizes something he didn't expect. He's not just remembering her, he's reliving her over and over again. And as he continues to relive those moments, replaying everything in his mind, something begins to shift in the way he sees her. It's no longer just about the memories or the silence. It's about what her absence represents. Because when a woman completely detaches, when she stops seeking attention, stops reaching out, stops making herself available, her value begins to rise in a way that can't be ignored. Not because she is trying to prove anything, but because she no longer needs to. When she was present, when she was consistent, her attention was accessible. It was there when he expected it. It responded when he engaged. It filled the space naturally. And because it was always available, it may not have felt rare. It may not have felt like something that could disappear. But now, everything is different. Her attention is no longer something he can reach. Her presence is no longer something he can rely on. And that shift from accessibility to absence changes how he perceives her completely. Because value is often tied to availability. What is always there can be overlooked. But what becomes rare becomes important. He starts to recognize that her silence is not weakness, it's control. Not control over him, but control over herself. She is no longer reacting, no longer waiting, no longer giving energy where it is not being met. And that level of detachment creates a kind of respect that didn't exist before. He begins to see her differently, not as someone who was always there, but as someone who chose not to be anymore. And that choice carries weight, because it shows that she didn't need the connection to define her. She valued herself enough to walk away and stay gone. And that's what makes her stand out. He may compare this to other situations, other people who remained available, who continued to reach out, who made their presence known even when it wasn't fully appreciated. And in that comparison, her absence becomes even more powerful. Because she did what most don't, she stopped. And in stopping, she created distance. In distance, she created value. And in value, she created desire. He may begin to feel a pull. Not because she is calling him back, but because her absence feels different from anything he has experienced before. It's not filled with mixed signals or occasional contact. It's clear, consistent, and complete. And that completeness is what makes it real. Because now, if he wants access to her presence again, it requires more than just waiting. It requires understanding, effort, and change. And that realization alone places her at a different level in his mind. She is no longer part of his routine. She is something he has to reach for. And deep down, he understands this. Her detached didn't push him away. It made him see her in a way that made it impossible to forget.